everyone. Good afternoon, good night, depending on where you are in the world. It's such an honor to be on this stage. And the truth is that I would like to start off our discussion today telling a story. And it is the story of how Polaroid, the camera, was invented. And I'll tell you in a second why this is so important for dentistry. The truth is that when we look at Polaroid, it was invented in 1944. It was actually born through the question of a 4-year-old kid to her dad. She asked, "Dad, can I see the picture that you just took?" It was just a simple question to her dad. And the dad said, "Of course not. It's 1944, so there was no technology for that." So the dad would be like, "Daughter, there's no way to do that. We'd need to go to a dark chamber. You'd need a technician. It will take time. It will be pricey." But he felt so uncomfortable for not having the answer to that he went after a technology to develop instantaneously pictures that became eventually Polaroid, a huge success. He was Edward Land. He was a famous inventor by the time. And I'd like you to reflect upon something. First of all, do you think that an adult would have made such a question? Or an expert? Or like an engineer that knew everything about the photo industry? For sure not. And why, though? Because they already knew the answer. And we make this mistake each day when we look at dentistry and implantology and all our knowledge, and we feel that we're better professionals because we have all the answers. Well, instead, it's a bit of the opposite. We need to bring about the questions and to defy all the beliefs that have made up the industry to the day it is today, but that at the same time is changing rapidly. And we can see that by the rapid rise of telemedicine. Back in 2019, whom of you would have guessed that telemedicine would be so widespread and used? Not most of us, for sure. But then eventually, a global pandemic forced physicians and, of course, health consumers and each one of you to use this technology. And when we use it, we felt there was value added, not only for us, but for the health consumer, for the patient. And so, to start off our discussion about new consumer trends and how do they shape our business, we need to have not only an expert mindset. We've been trained to be experts, to have knowledge, to know everything about dentistry and implantology. But the truth is that in a rapidly changing world, we need to have a bit of its opposite, a beginner's mindset. A beginner's mindset is the mindset who takes all their beliefs, knowledge, and understanding of the market and does not throw it in the trash. Please don't do that. But also, you don't cut and paste answers from the past to your new challenges. But you use all these beliefs, knowledge, as a starting point of our reflection if they're aligned with the changes in consumer behavior, in technology, in the markets. Because if for a moment, within our career, within our studios, within our business, our rate of change is lower than the external rate of change of the consumer, it means we're getting more and more obsolete. And of course, this is going to hamper our businesses. So that's why we're going to explore today what are the main consumer trends that are shaping actually these new consumer behaviors and businesses, right? So basically, consumer trends shape business decisions in a digital world, and the world is changing. When we look at how the world is changing, we hear a lot about digital transformation, but we don't always understand what it is about. And so let's try to understand what are the 5 key characteristics of a digital world and what are the implications for our businesses. First of all, we live in an interconnected world with a lot of variables where our health consumer is also a Uber customer, uses Airbnb, does everything online. He or she starts to shape their decisions and expectations based on their best experiences out there, not on what the dentistry industry does every day. This makes everything much more complex, right? Second, everything is real time. When we look at the rate of change, as we said before, everything is in real time. Our consumer wants instant gratification, as we'll see, and therefore must be more agile and bring value to the customer more quickly. Third, big data. Different to a pre-digital world, now we can metrify everything. And the more we're digitally interconnected with our health customer, we can actually understand better their pain points and understand better what are the procedures that connect more with them, the pricification and everything, right? But we have to learn how to deal with all that big data, because as we'll see, it's a lot of data. Fourth is the exponentiality of the rate of change. When we look at the rate of change in the dentistry and implantology market, it's not growing linearly as it were in the past, with linear innovations, with not so many changes, and with everything more predictable. No, now everything is exponential. And when we look at an exponential curve, the implication is that the rate of change is faster and faster. And who has to change their beliefs and mindset and understanding of the consumer faster and faster is each one of us. And last, it's the word of artificial intelligence. When we look at the new technologies that are shaping, and improving our relationship with the consumer, we have to understand that we have to differentiate ourselves from AI. If we think we're still better professionals because we have more knowledge, we're more intelligent, we, have all of this, well, AI does everything this much better than us. So it means we have to rethink what's our role as physicians, as implantologists, as dentists. And the truth is that when we take all these 5 characteristics together, they change each market and industry out there. I've chosen an industry that's not yours, which is the automotive industry. Go back 10 years ago, the automotive industry was not innovating anymore. The car makers were the same, and then a guy gets into the market, this guy, Elon Musk, now the richest man in the world, and launches Tesla with a total different value proposition. He launches Tesla, and Tesla grows exponentially to the point that now is the most valuable car maker in the world. And he must have been asking himself, and so Toyota what now? I'm the biggest car maker, and I know Toyota still makes 30 times more cars than Tesla. What's the problem here? The point is that Tesla brings more value to the customer. It's intangible, but reacts more quickly to customers' expectations and new behaviors. Look at what they did. They softwareized their car, which generates big data in real time and personalizes the driving experience. They disintermediated their business model, and now they're selling direct to consumer and not through, car dealerships. They, made it sustainable. They made information transparent and accessible. And this has totally changed the automotive industry as much as everything is changing as well in the dentistry and implantology business. Because in face of all of these changes stemming from new consumer behaviors, we can decide between 2 options eventually. One is to be a spectator of this and, like being at the movies, just sit and watch and say, look, Andrea, I understand changes are happening, but the truth is that my business is doing well, my consumer does not seem to ask me anything new, the technology that I have is enough. I know it's tempting to think this way. The truth, though, is that we can pay a much larger price in the future if we stick to our old way of doing business. It's just asking to the executives at Kodak, BlackBerry, Blockbuster, all those cases where these companies that were leaders in their markets failed, but not because new competitors got into the market. This happens the whole time, and it will always happen with each one of you in dentistry. But the truth is that they refused to change themselves in face of changes in consumer behavior. So the second alternative we have is to be the main character of our own transformation, understanding that the focus now is on the customer. He or she decide everything that we have to do next, and therefore we must change the way we relate to them and we innovate. And to start off understanding how consumer behaviors shape eventually our business decisions, I wanted to ask if any one of you knows why Jeff Bezos, the founder of Amazon, always leaves an empty chair in his room. Leaves an empty chair that is basically, this chair leaves it next to the table. And when everything from his executive committee is seated there, basically he takes it out, brings it next to the table, and reminds everyone there that the customer is sitting on that chair. This is the customer's chair. It's symbolic. But the truth is that, although you might say, Andrea, this is kind of cliche, we already focus on the customer, tell me something new. The truth is that in a digital world, our health customer is much more empowered thanks to technology. Because look at the 4 levers that are empowering our health consumer. First of all, we have more access to information. We can look for information, we can compare, we can review, we can compare prices, we can look for alternatives when we're not satisfied with a competitor of ours. And so, access to information is power of choice, and eventually is more power to the health consumer. Second lever that empowers the customer is actually more competition. So when we look at that, more competition is actually what empowers the customer. Why? We have different channels empowering the customer, and so eventually what happens is that he or she have more alternatives, and they can actually understand better where they can go. And this leads us to our third lever, lower switching costs. Think about your bank in the past. You would go to your physical branch of the bank that is closest to your home, as much as we would do oftentimes with our physician, right? But then, when we wanted to switch that bank because we were not satisfied, we would end up sticking to them. Why? Because the cost of switching maybe would entail me taking the car, driving 20 minutes to another neighborhood, the same thing with a physician. These are switching costs. And digitalization brought these switching costs down to 0. And so when we look at that, fidelization, retention of our customer is much harder. Why? Because they can switch us in a moment if they're not 100% satisfied with the experience that we provide. And fourth, we actually have a consumer that is a content creator. If it's, if he or he is satisfied with the experience that we provide them, they will talk a lot about us, and this will become one of our marketing, campaigns, spontaneous. And if they're not satisfied, this can become a nightmare. Why? Because consumers have voice. And so when we look at that, I want you to imagine living in a world where you actually can rate everything, right? The Netflix addicts can recognize here in this video, right? They can recognize the first episode of the 3rd season of Black Mirror, right? The series where basically you can imagine a world where each interaction you give and receive a rating, right? Imagine a world where you live in this transparency and you can give out a rating each time you interact with the business, with the doctor, with the bank, and so on. What happens is that, first of all, I want you to think about how will you behave differently in face of your customer. If you know that suddenly that he steps out the door of your, clinic, he can rate you and the experience you provided. Well, of course, definitely, you will pay much more attention to the experience you provide to them. And the second question that I want you to think about is what happens the more we are interconnected with our digital devices, such as smartphones, wearables, computers, and so on. Think about it. Well, we generate more data. And when we look at the volume of data that as a society, human society, we generated since the beginning of times, it has grown exponentially, and we generated 90% of data in history over the last decade. And this does not stop growing. We're in the, height of 44 zettabytes of data, which, just to give you an idea, it's a number with 12 zeros, and if you were to store this in iPads and put one on top of the other, it is 6 times the distance between Earth and the moon. It's a lot of data. But oftentimes, we quickly jump to the conclusion that the more data we have about our health consumer, the better decisions we can make and the better the experience we can provide to them. The truth is that it's not that straightforward. It really depends on what we do with all that data. Because oftentimes, we do not act very differently than a doctor in the following situation. Imagine a situation where you feel ill, you have something, some strange symptoms, and you go to your physician and you ask him or her, "Doctor, what do I have? Please make a diagnosis of all these symptoms." And the doctor says, "No, I don't need to look at your symptoms. Based on what you told me, I think that you have this because I've seen that in the past." Imagine how you would react. You'd be like, "He didn't watch my symptoms and he prescribed me something." You'd feel frustrated. You'd feel that you've not been heard. Probably you'll have side effects based on a wrong prescription. But think about it. Don't we do exactly the same when we deal with customers oftentimes? We do not sell them something based on what they need, but we sell them something based on what we need, which does not make us different than this physician prescribing something without even paying attention to the symptoms. But the truth is that in a world where the consumer and the health consumer is more empowered, as we've seen with these 4 levers, we have to start every innovation process or every sale process from what? From our consumer pain point. And it's not just a physical pain point. It's sometimes a customer expectations pain point. It's what he or she needs without them even knowing that they need. That's what data can help us doing. Personalization, improvement of experience, added value, and all of this that, as we'll see, are part of the symptoms that our health consumer is now having. Because when we look at these main symptoms, these actually make us, as a physician, as a dentist, as a doctor, as the same thing as a shampoo in a supermarket, right? Have you ever felt that feeling of being lost in front of so many choices that make you even decide poorly instead of better, due to this phenomenon called the choice paradox, that the more options you have, right, the less you're able to make good decisions. Why? Because our health consumer is constantly bombarded with promotions, with websites and apps, and download this and purchase that, I give you a discount. All of our competitors and different channels actually focusing on getting our consumers' attention. We're all competing for the same thing. And if we do not change the relationship and the way we approach our consumer when we respond to their new symptoms, as we call them, we can feel lost in translation, and our commodity, right, not different than a shampoo on a supermarket shelf. And so let's go now through 5 main symptoms, as I call it, which namely are consumer behaviors in the digital world, that we need to pay attention and that are so important for the launch of Zi, because Zi summarizes everything that the consumer needs nowadays based on these symptoms. Again, let's start off with the first one: transparency and clarity of sourcing. The consumer wants to know how something has been made, wants to have access to the information because he or she are used to having all this access to information in all other fields, and they're starting to do the same thing in the health sector. Look at what a chocolate brand here in Brazil did. Chocolate and coffee, they have a brand of coffee as well. So they've been putting the faces of the, coffee producers on the envelopes. Why? Because there's a QR code that you can scan and you can know exactly where that coffee had been planted, taken, processed, and the stories of the people behind that. This helps to drive business. Why? Because the new generations are more and more, empowered, and they want to get to the source of information, up to the point that a recent McKinsey report calls Generation Z, which eventually is going to be more and more of our target audience, the true generation. They want nothing but the truth from what something is made of, where it has been done, what's its effect. They are informed, they look for information, and so we have to provide that clarity. And when we look at the power that Zi brings about of all the story of how it was developed and of zirconia and everything, that makes it very interesting and appealing to consumers that are looking for important information about the product. The second big symptom that we have to consider is actually sustainability, which is very much related to that. It's a consequence of access to information. When we look at sustainability, the truth is that it's not anymore a PR campaign, but as Larry Fink, one of the most powerful persons in the world, he's the CEO of BlackRock, one of the biggest private equity funds in the world. He wrote a letter recently to all of his invested companies and its CEOs, and he wrote that he's going to stop investing in them if they do not comply with ESG, environmental, social, and governance pillars. Why? Again, because it's not anymore a marketing campaign or a PR stunt to be sustainable. It's a business driver. So sustainability is also about us profits, as Larry Fink says. And the truth is that when we look at statistics, the consumers are looking more and more to invest and spend money on environmentally friendly products. Look at how the willingness to spend money on environmentally friendly products in the US has grown from 2011 to 2019, and it has been growing more and more after the pandemics. Now, our third symptom, let's get back to it, immediate gratification. Again, who recalls one of the 5 characteristics was that everything is real time, and your consumer expects added value from you almost instantly. Look at what happened to me some months ago. I relocated to the US, and I moved to New York, and I rented out an apartment from a friend of mine. And this friend of mine promised me that he would leave a bed, or at least a couch, for the first night that I'd arrive. Truth is, when I arrive, there's no couch, and my friend forgot to tell me that he had taken it away because he really needed it. So I arrived and I'm stranded in New York, and I have nowhere to sleep. What saved me? Amazon Prime. Same-day delivery by Amazon. We are used to instant gratification and having access to everything we want on the spot and also wherever we want. Because actually we live in a world where any purchase is really omnichannel. On average, a Deloitte report shows that a health consumer consults around 20 different channels per purchase. Again, they look for information, they compare, they read reviews, and again, they purchase here, but then they do a post-sale, and they maybe switch to a competitor. Omnichannel asks us to create new customer journeys that, first of all, are much longer than in the past. We have to take control of what happens when people do not even yet consider putting an implant. And never ends eventually, because after we put an implant, our customer journey does not end. We continue having a relationship with that customer. Why? Because he or she is a content creator. And the second characteristics of new consumer journeys today are that they integrate online and offline touch points, and the frequency of these touch points increase. And this leads us to our fourth symptom. That is, the more frequency of touch points we have, the more personalization. Because look at the advantages of digital in order to provide this fourth consumer behavior that is more and more important. Again, personalization. Digital is a great tool for that. Why? Because it helps us to increase the frequency of touch points that we have between ourselves and our health consumer. The more frequency we have, the more data and information we collect about this consumer, and consequently, the more we can personalize the experience at scale. This is so interesting because, look, in a pre-digital world, the best information we might have about our consumer was their name. And look, actually, Starbucks thrived on this, making it personal, putting our name on the cup. When you see a user-generated content on social media from Starbucks compared to Dunkin' Donuts, their biggest competitor in the US, what happens? Starbucks has 400 times more organic content created by their consumers. Why? Because you have an incentive to tell a story about personalization. You like it, it's an experience, it's memorable. But okay, this is pre-digital. What about now? In a world where we collect so many data points that we've seen before, this is even too much to handle. Well, the whole health sector thrives on this. Look at this new market that wearable and devices, IoT, created and changed the patient journey in healthcare. We're actually moving from what we can call not really a healthcare, but a reactive sick care, to really a proactive healthcare sector that is based on the real-time data that each touch point where we interact with our health consumer provides us, and this market is now worth around $100 billion. The more our devices and our products are connected and we digitally interact with our health consumer, the better we are able to collect data, and as a consequence, we personalize the experience for them. And our fifth, and very important as well, symptom, again, consumer trend and behavior, is that they want innovation and technology. Why? Because it changes everything when it comes to the added value that you provide in their health journey. Innovation and technology is at the core of a new health system that oftentimes is called value-based healthcare, which is not based on the number of patients that you actually attend, but basically on the health outcome that you manage to provide them. Everything is measured by that, and the only neighbor here is technology. And the funny thing is that our consumer asks for innovation, asks for technology, but they do not actually know what they're looking for. That is your challenge. Because look, Steve Jobs, when he was about to launch the iPhone to the world in 2006, he noticed that just asking your consumer what they want is not enough to understand their expectations. Why? Because he was doing focus groups and he was asking to people the same question, which was, which type of smartphone would you like to have? Do you dream in having? And everybody was giving always the same answer. They were saying, I would like to have a big smartphone with a big screen and with a big keyboard. Why a big keyboard? Well, you might recall that was the time of BlackBerry, and people felt that BlackBerry had a small keyboard. No one ever asks a screen touch. Why? Because that's your duty as an innovator. You have to anticipate what your customer needs without he or she even being able to express it. Why? Because if they're able to express it, it's just too late. Everyone's already working on that, and you're not being an innovator anymore. So that's the core of innovation. And again, based on these 5 big symptoms that I feel are the most important nowadays when we look at actually what the consumer and health consumer expects when he steps out in our clinic, is what we do now next based on this. Because the truth is that when we get back again to point 0, we need to understand how we can stand out and what we have to do then in order to not be a commodity anymore. We need to do 3 main things based on that. First of all, we have to implement new consumer journeys that are actually integrating online and offline in a symbiotic way, what we can call new phygital journeys, that again, we understand what's physical, what are the physical touch points, but in between we have to put a lot of digital interactions, follow up to that visit that you had, scanning and everything, and then you interact through different channels, either it's WhatsApp, either it's SMS, and then CRM. This helps us to personalize the experience in the clinic, and not only, also outside of the clinic. Second thing that we have to do is actually we have to sell not anymore just a product or a health service. We have to sell experiences. Experiences that are memorable, that add value, that are not commodities anymore. I work a lot with the aesthetics industry as well. And what is happening is that the health consumer is getting now to the clinic not wanting any more, hyaluronic acid or Botox. That was a commodity. Now they want to know exactly the formula, the producer, they ask for this, they're informed. And if you don't embed that into an experience that is memorable, personalized, and adds value, you again get back to commodity mode. And no one of us wants to be that shampoo on the shelf. And the third thing that we need to do is that we have to create an emotional connection with the health consumer. That is likely the most important thing that we have to do in a digital world. And it's a paradox, right? Because you might tell, you told me, Andrea, to digitalize our interaction, then it means I'm going to lose the connection. The truth is that it's the opposite. We will have much more time available if we outsource some of our interaction with the customer through digital to really focus on what's important and give our full attention to what his or her pain points are in all of our relationship with them. We can be more empathic, we can be more collaborative, we can co-create solutions. And the truth is that on a last note, on this emotional connection, and to close it out here, I wanted to actually talk about the importance of reciprocation in a digital world. This is probably the thing that our consumers expect the most. And the best way to talk about how reciprocation works is through an example, because I would like you to imagine in the following situation. Imagine it's Friday night, you had a drink or two, a glass of wine with your colleagues after work, and then you make the mistake of getting your car and drive back home. You can't drive and drink. And then you're stopped by police, and you get a DUI. And now it's 2 a.m. You just don't want to call anyone at home, and then you're like, you always remember of that friend that never lets you down. You call him or her, and that friend is sleeping. But anyhow, puts on their clothes, gets the car, picks you up, drives you home. It's 3 a.m. by then. And while you're at home, you turn around for a last second and you ask something to him or her. You wonder, hey friend, why did you do all this for me? And I want you to think about the answer, because it is always the same answer the whole time. It's because I knew you would have done the same for me. This is likely the biggest expectation that our health consumer has on us. We can actually fill the blanks and check all the items that I've spoken about, but if we do not do the first step in helping that health consumer, especially in a turbulent times where they're not only more empowered, but they're more undecided, anxious, stressed because of all this information that pops up all the time. If you don't work on the human aspect of it and you think digital transformation is only about digitalization of your business, then we're on the wrong track. We're on the right track when, again, we focus on responding always to consumer behaviors, quickly, swiftly, adding value, bringing about good experiences, and focusing on transparency, sustainability, personalization, innovation and technology, and always making it a journey and not only a transactional experience. Thanks a lot for your attention. And now, the word back with Dr. Sergio. Thanks again.
Hey, Andrea. Grazie mille.
Grazie mille, Dottor.
Very good. Thank you. What an enlightening lecture.